This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the best all-in-one platform for all of your website building needs. Hey guys, it's Celestia, and there are very few video topics you guys have requested as much as how to handle self-doubt as an artist. That's not even a little bit surprising, given that it's something almost every artist experiences and is basically a universally shared struggle. So of course it's something a lot of people are going to want to hear and talk about. But while I've always understood the importance of the topic, I never felt qualified to discuss it because it's still something I still struggle with so much myself. I thought that in order for me to talk about handling self-doubt as an artist, I had to have already overcome self-doubt as an artist. So I just kept waiting for that day to come, and it didn't. And honestly, I don't think it ever will. Self-doubt is something most artists struggle with for life. And if I keep waiting to talk about it until mine is gone, I'll be waiting forever. And especially because I so deeply understand firsthand how all-encompassing, overwhelming, and inescapable it can feel, it's a topic I don't want to keep postponing indefinitely. I think it's important to talk about, because the problems it leads to can be so debilitating and wide-reaching that I don't think it's possible to have too much discussion about how to cope with them. That in mind, I decided that while I can't offer advice on how to overcome self-doubt as an artist from the perspective of one who has, I can still share my experiences with things that have helped me handle it as one that's still actively and constantly struggling to. So that's exactly what I'm going to do in today's video. I'll be going over some of the biggest causes for self-doubt, the biggest problems it causes for artists, and the best ways I know of to take the power that those problems have over you away. And hopefully, even if it isn't some expert-led objective advice to cure self-doubt forever, it'll still have some value for other people like me who are still struggling to figure out how to, and might always be. But before we get into all that, let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. I think I've said those words enough times by now for that to basically be my catchphrase, because they've been supporting this channel for an incredibly long time and have been my favorite website building and hosting platform for even longer. I say it so often, in fact, that when I don't open a video with that week's Squarespace-related rambling, comments express legitimate concern for my well-being, and when I do, there are just as many saying, "Oh, thank God, it's a Squarespace video again." And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way, because there's a good reason they're my favorite website building platform and why I refuse to shut up about it. I sincerely believe they're the best. I built my personal Duchess Celestia portfolio site on Squarespace, a process that was so legitimately easy, fun, and flexible that they're always my first recommendation for any artist looking to build their own. But while I personally fell in love with the platform because of the versatility and wide variety of portfolio options, that's really just the beginning of what they have to offer. With a huge library of beautiful, professionally designed website templates in a wide variety of different categories, there's a perfect template to start building your site with no matter what you need it to be or do, all of which can be customized so extensively and easily that you can make absolutely every aspect of it your own. With features that help you maximize your site's functionality and visual design tools that make establishing valuable brand recognition easy, the possibilities for your site are practically endless. You can even turn it into an online store just as easily using the Squarespace Commerce platform, which lets you do everything from managing your inventory to taking sales and even to printing shipping labels. It's just as easy for your customers to pay as it is for you to sell, too, since Squarespace offers all of the most popular payment methods, like Klarna, ACH Direct Debit, Apple Pay, Afterpay, and ClearPay, as well as the option to send individualized invoices to specific clients. Whether you're an artist in need of a portfolio, an entrepreneur building an online store, a creator setting up an interactive blog, or a small business owner making a landing page, Squarespace is the place to do it. And you can find out yourself by going to squarespace.com to get your own free trial today. And once you've built the perfect site that you're ready to launch, you can get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain by going to squarespace.com/DuchessCelestia, linked in the description. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video, and please go check them out. Now, all that out of the way, let's talk about self-doubt. It's obviously something everyone deals with, not just artists. Unless you're some kind of deeply enviable superhuman being, most people have low moments throughout life where they feel like they're not smart enough, not strong enough, not capable enough to accomplish what they want and become who they want to be. And that's just part of being human. It sucks, but it's natural. For artists, though, it happens to suck in a particularly unique and awful way. For most, they can silence the voice of their inner critic with logic. If self-doubt is telling you that you're not smart enough to pass a test, logic can remind you that you've passed many before, and that you've studied enough to be more than capable regardless of any anxiety or insecurity making you feel otherwise. You might feel like you're not good enough to apply for a job you want, but that fear can be assuaged by just focusing on the qualifications that you've earned that prove otherwise. In most cases, while self-doubt is still a lifelong battle for most, it can be silenced gradually as you prove it wrong through your own perseverance and progress. There are only so many tests that you can pass before the voice telling you that you'll fail starts becoming less convincing to you. There's only so long you can do well at your job before the feeling that you're not good enough for it starts to fade. There are objectively quantifiable benchmarks for success in most cases that, when you reach them, help immensely to silence self-doubt, because they're proof that it's just factually wrong. You can measure your own improvement based on them and reassure yourself of your progress. It's not quite like that with art. Sure, you can measure your technical improvement by your understanding of the fundamentals and ability to apply them, but for most, Technical skill is just a fraction of what we want to develop. We want to develop unique styles that we love and are comfortable with. We want to develop versatility. We want to develop particular skills needed to bring certain ideas to life. We want to get good at drawing the specific subject matter we like. All of us have different goals, so growth and success looks different for every artist. And if your goal is more than just technical skill, being able to objectively assess that you've developed that isn't really going to do a whole hell of a lot to silence your self-doubt, because it's very likely that that alone won't enable you to reach your individual goals. I've studied realism for over a decade, and can confidently say that I understand the fundamentals, and am able to realistically depict most things in most mediums. I can objectively and factually measure my technical skill by completing exercises that demonstrate the abilities and knowledge that I've developed, and comparing my results to those of others measuring the same skills. That has never done me one singular ounce of good when it came to handling self-doubt, because that has never been enough to make me good at making the kind of art I want to make, since I don't actually like realism and I vastly prefer more exaggerated styles. But I suck at reinterpreting the fundamentals in a stylized manner, because I never know how far to push certain exaggerations or when I should deliberately draw something fundamentally wrong because it looks better that way. And I take the wrong creative liberties constantly in the process of trying to figure that out. I have no idea what my style is, and I'm still desperately trying and failing to develop it into one that I like. I'm terrible at using any of the knowledge that I have of facial anatomy to inform my ability to draw faces in more exaggerated styles, including my own. I've developed all of the universally necessary skills that artists need on paper to consider themselves objectively good, but because those skills are only really enough to provide a foundation from which to build further, being objectively good in that sense is not enough to make me objectively good at drawing what and how I want. And there is no way to measure that, because for artists, beyond that foundation, we don't have universal benchmarks in our craft that can reassure us of our improvement and self-worth. We have to make our own. When I thought I could never run 10 miles as an asthmatic that never did cardio, self-doubt almost convinced me not to try. But I tried anyway, and gradually I improved. I made progress that I could see, progress that would be measured the same way for anyone trying to do what I was doing. So now that I'm at the point where I'm running 10 miles a day without breaking a sweat, the self-doubt that held me back for so long is gone. It has nothing to feed it. No inner voice can say, "You can't do this," when I have objective proof that I can because I've done it every day for years. And most things people feel self-doubt about are similar. There comes a point where challenging it over and over makes it go away, because you develop the skills that you need to prove beyond a doubt that it was wrong. But beyond the foundation of fundamental skill at art, that point doesn't come for artists. We never reach a point where we can objectively say, based on this criteria, I can now conclude once and for all that I am factually a good artist. Because there is no universal definition of what makes an artist good. The quality of art is completely subjective. Stylistic choices you make because you like them will look horrible to people who don't, and that has no bearing on how good your art is or how good of an artist you are. And if we can't consult any universal criteria for judging our work's quality beyond just the technical, how are we ever supposed to silence our self-doubt that tells us it's bad? We can't prove it wrong, because it's not something that can be proven. It's a matter of opinion. Like Susan Hiller said in her interview with The Guardian, self-doubt is always present for artists because we have the job and the privilege of defining problems and then asking ourselves whether we have solved them. So we deal with self-doubt on two fronts. Not only do we doubt that our work shows adequate progress towards our goals, we also doubt whether those goals themselves are even right or enough, something that's only made worse by the fact that they'll likely change over time. And without the reassurance that others have to combat their self-doubt, with no way to prove to ourselves that we're good, artists, in my opinion, suffer much worse, more long-lasting, difficult to handle consequences of it. We're constantly facing the fear that we're not good enough yet to take on the projects that we want, or bring the ideas that we have to life, often to the point that we give up before even trying, and limit ourselves only to what we think we're good enough to make, which is a self-defeating cycle that prevents us from developing the skills that we need to prove that self-doubt wrong. We're so unsure of our ability to judge our own work's quality that we're terrified to share it with anyone else. After all, if we can't even tell if it's good and self-doubt tells us it's terrible, there's no way for us not to think other people will think it's terrible. I can easily work out or run in the company of others because I know I'm an objectively good athlete. I can't draw in front of others, at least not comfortably, because whether or not I'm a good artist is a matter of opinion, and if I have no confidence in my own opinion, I'm not going to be comfortable opening myself up to those of others. For many, it reaches a point where they don't even feel confident calling themselves artists at all. Statements like, "I'm an aspiring artist," or "I want to be an artist," may as well be the catchphrases of beginner and intermediate artists everywhere, because there's always that anxiety about saying you definitively are an artist if you feel like your skill level doesn't match the skill level that you think others will expect of someone with that title. And if self-doubt is holding us back from even identifying ourselves as artists for fear of being seen as unqualified, there's really really no limit to what it will hold ourselves back from doing with our art in turn. And with no way to consistently prove it wrong, we often give into it and enter into this endless loop where not feeling good enough yet convinces us that we never will be, subsequently stopping us from trying to challenge ourselves at all, which would have been the only thing that could have allowed us to improve enough to feel like we were good enough. Like an art growth catch-22. And it's painful. There's a feeling of dread in the pit of your chest that, at least in my experience, never goes away. When you tell someone that you're an artist and you wait for them to see your work and decide that that's not a title you deserve. The fear that you're not good enough to make the art that you want stops countless beautiful ideas from ever being brought to life. Self-doubt convinces you that your work isn't even worth sharing, because your inability to see beauty or value in it means no one else will either. It feels smothering, like half the time you can't breathe under the weight of it, and it's so overwhelming that some artists end up giving up on art altogether just to spare themselves that feeling. It saps all the joy out of something that, unless it's your job, is primarily or solely done to bring you joy, making it fundamentally pointless to pursue. And while I can't offer you any ultimate wisdom or ways to solve that problem altogether and never worry about that crippling self-doubt again, I have at least learned a few things throughout my many years of struggling with it myself that help. And all of them, at least in my experience, start with figuring out what's making you feel it. While the cause is obviously going to be different for everyone, there are some common ones that a lot of us share. The fear of failure, the fear that our art is bad and will be forever, and the fear that others will think it is. And naturally, each cause has a different solution, or a different potential solution anyway. I'm sure there are a million more than the ones that I found and will tell you about, and that the ones that I found won't work for everyone, but I'll tell you about them anyway. It's worth a shot. The fear of failure is probably the most difficult one to address because everyone has a different reason for fearing failure. Some people define their self-worth by the quality of their art and are terrified of the damage that would be done to it by failing to maintain a certain level of quality. Some face pressure to succeed from family, friends, peers, or even themselves, and are terrified of not meeting those expectations. Some have very little free time and feel like they will have wasted it if the art that they make with it doesn't turn out well. Honestly, I could go on all day with a million potential reasons that artists might fear failure, and still not get any deeper than the tip of the failure-fearing iceberg. So it goes without saying that figuring out why you're scared to fail is the first and most important step, and it's something I can't give you the answer to. But once you've found it, there are at least some ways to make handling it a little easier. First of all, and I've said this a million times before, you're going to fail. And whether you like it or not, you need to accept that that's a normal, natural, inevitable part of learning how to do anything. Artistic progress isn't linear, and there are a million ups and downs as you develop a million different skills used for a million different techniques. Trying new things as you learn those skills means sucking at them at first, and you have to make bad art to make good art. I have a whole video about why making bad art isn't bad, and how freeing it can be to accept that. So if that's something that you struggle with, you might want to check it out via the iCard above. But the point here is that regardless of how you feel about making bad art, or at least art that you're not proud of, even if you don't agree that it's good and valuable to, it's unavoidable. And preparing yourself for failure rather than fearfully trying to avoid it is going to make it a lot less discouraging when it happens. If you go into every piece you start expecting that if you try your best it'll always turn out exactly like you want, it's going to be crushing when it doesn't, and all you can see is its flaws. But if you go into every piece expecting it to be as good as it can be and show progress and improvement, even if it doesn't turn out exactly like you want it to, you won't be nearly as disappointed, and you'll likely be able to see more of its strengths alongside those flaws, if expecting those flaws to be present takes away their power to completely overshadow the strengths. At least for me, it's all about adjusting expectations. Fearing failure is a lot less overwhelming when you redefine what failure actually means for you. Of course, you're gonna have a hard time if your definition of failing as an artist is making any art that you don't like, or failing to perfectly bring your ideas to life. If you work hard to change the way you view it though, and instead aim to achieve improvement with each piece rather than perfection, you'll only really fail if you learn nothing from making it, which is exceptionally difficult to do if you're actively trying to learn and grow. One of the most valuable pieces of advice that I've received only to immediately dismiss it for a decade because of hustle culture was to focus on your process and not your end result. You put a lot of pressure on yourself if the only reason you make art is to love every final piece you make, especially since that's an almost impossible goal. I'm not saying you have to stop wanting each piece to turn out well. I don't even know if that's possible, much less reasonable. The drive to make good art is something that we need to push and motivate us, and that's valuable, but not if it's our only goal. If it is, more often than not, we'll spend half our time feeling like we've failed when we don't, which only feeds our self-doubt and proves it right. Strive to make each piece the best it can be, absolutely, but also strive to enjoy the time you spend making it. Focus on the journey towards improvement. Focus on what you learn while making each piece. Focus on your favorite parts that you have the most fun doing. Focus on the creating and not just the creation itself. There's just as much value in making art as there there is in the art that you make. And if enjoying making it and learning from it is just as much of a goal for you as making it good, the fear of failure is going to be a lot less overwhelming, because you'll know that so long as you learn something from it and feel joy in the process, you won't fail. But it's entirely possible that you're not afraid of failure and you already have healthy, realistic goals for your art, and you're still dealing with self-doubt to an impossibly miserable degree. I know, because that's me, which is why it's important to also address the other two most common causes for it, because for most of us, there's more than one, and overcoming self-doubt means handling them all. That in mind, let's talk about the fear that others will think our art is bad. It's easy to say, just stop caring what other people think about it, but art is an incredibly personal expression of our creativity and our identities, and it's not easy to just be okay with the fact that sharing it with others might mean they'll take a gigantic shit on the thing that you poured your soul into, because its quality is subjective and they might not like it. For a lot of artists, as I've already mentioned, we associate our self-worth with the quality of our art. We shouldn't, and we should value the joy we feel from making it more, but what we should and shouldn't do usually has very little bearing on what we actually do. Mostly because it's really, really hard not to. I'm an artist is something a lot of people say, not just to express what they do, but who they are, because art is so integral to their identity that it may as well be who they are. So it's difficult not to feel like the quality of the art we make defines the value that we have as people. And if we have no objective way to measure our work's quality, and its quality is what our self-worth depends on, what others think of it becomes overwhelmingly important. And it's not frivolous or vain or silly to feel self-doubt because of the fear that they'll think it's bad, when for a lot of us, that means they'll think we're bad, and we have no way to prove them wrong. But just as it's important for us to separate our self-worth from our own opinion on our art's quality, it's equally important to separate it from what other people think of it, as difficult as both may be. Making art that you think sucks is an inevitable part of growing as an artist, and making art that other people think sucks is too. It's not something you can avoid, and if it's inevitable, it's better to prepare for it than fear it. If art's quality is subjective beyond technical skill, people are always going to find something to hate about it, because people will always have differing opinions. The art that you make will never suit everyone's tastes, and it's not supposed to. It's supposed to suit yours. It not suiting someone else's doesn't make it bad. I'm sure most of you have looked at art made by others and thought, this really isn't my thing, without thinking, it sucks, because your artistic preferences are unique, and the things that you like or dislike are going to differ from the things that others do. And if you can give other people's art that space to be good without being what you like, you can give your art the space to be good without being what someone else likes. You deserve that. If you let people disliking your art make you dislike it, you're never gonna escape your self-doubt, because the existence of opinions other than your own will be enough to keep feeding it. What I've learned more than anything else throughout my way too many years as an artist is that you need to work to achieve goals and improvement so that you can make art that you like, and measure your success by your ability to do so rather than your ability to impress everyone who sees it, because only one of those is actually possible. To be clear though, I'm not saying that that means the opinions that others have on your art have no value because they're subjective and you shouldn't care about them at all. Input is helpful. Self-doubt clouds our ability to assess the quality of our own work because all we can see is how it falls short of what we wanted it to be. And having an unbiased perspective of someone who isn't just a yes man telling you everything you make is amazing or an asshole telling you it all sucks can help you see it more accurately and realistically. Having someone honestly tell you the ways it's good and the ways it could be better on a technical level is necessary for growth. And having someone tell you the things they like about it and the things they dislike can be incredibly helpful too. You just have to differentiate between the two and stop hearing, I don't like this stylistic choice, as that stylistic choice is bad. And hearing people's honest thoughts about your art can even help you cope with self-doubt rather than make it worse, because more often than not, they'll comment on its strengths as well as its weaknesses. Self-doubt makes you feel like you have nowhere to go but up, that artistic improvement is this massive mountain that you're at the bottom of, and it's just too big to climb. But hearing someone tell you, actually you're not at the bottom, you've already climbed a good amount of the way, can make it feel a lot more achievable to keep climbing. Hearing that you've made progress as an artist shuts self-doubt up when it tells you that you can't, because it's proof that you can and you will make more. But all of that requires you to put a lot of hard work into developing a good, healthy relationship with your art's quality and your self-worth. And a lot of people aren't there yet. I wasn't for a very long time. And if you're not at a point yet where you can confidently say, I'm gonna be able to like my art regardless of what anyone else thinks of it, that's okay. And if that's where you're at, yes, my advice is still to try to detach your self-worth as an artist from other people's opinions. But it's also to accept that you haven't yet, and that it might really hurt you to hear those opinions right now. And if the idea of hearing them is feeding your artistic self-doubt, maybe for now, you shouldn't open yourself up to that possibility, at least not as much. If you're so scared of making art because others might think it's bad, that it's keeping you from making it at all, then maybe try to make art that's private and just for you until that fear is more manageable, or share it only with people that you trust. You can build yourself up to sharing it, and no one has to see anything you make before you have. And if you do want to share it with some trusted people, that can help too, especially if you open up to them about the self-doubt that you're feeling. Almost every artist knows what it's like to feel like their work is terrible, and so are they, and they'll never be good enough. More often often than not, expressing that you're feeling that way to one that you're comfortable with is something that'll be met with immediate understanding and support. Leaning on other people who know what you're going through because they are too is more helpful than it sounds, because it shows you that it's normal to go through it, and you're not alone, you're just human. But okay, say you're not afraid of failure or anyone else's opinions. Crippling self-doubt may still be a problem for you, which I once again know because that's also me now. And that's because it has just as much to do with how we see our own art as it does with how others do. Not just when it comes to self-worth, but also when it comes to potential. Self-doubt, for artists, often makes us feel like because our skill level isn't where we want it to be, we'll never get it to where we want it to be because we just aren't capable. And even a healthy definition of failure and no fear of judgment doesn't make that go away, at least in my experience. I think most people deal with enough insecurity to worry that they'll never be better than they are now, because they aren't now. That all they'll ever be capable of is what they can do now. But you can use that worry against self-doubt if you just look at it more logically than emotionally. Emotionally, we see our shortcomings as evidence that we have no artistic potential because we're so disheartened and disappointed that we haven't reached it yet. And that's clouding our ability to think about it rationally. Logically, we have to realize that that just doesn't make any sense. The two aren't related. Being bad now doesn't mean being bad forever. It just means feeling like you will be. And while that feeling is overwhelming sometimes, that doesn't make it right. So if you take the whole defeatist, I'll never be a good artist perspective away from self-doubt by thinking about it critically, you're left with something a lot more valuable: self-awareness. Because self-doubt is really as powerful as it is because it's not completely wrong or bad. It's not a bad thing to be humble and acknowledge that you're not perfect yet, or to question your decisions so that you can make better ones, rather than always having complete confidence in them. It's good to have a realistic perception of your own skill, and that almost always means doubting that skill when it has room for improvement. That only becomes a problem if you let being aware of your shortcomings convince you that you'll never overcome them. If your reason for not pursuing a project or idea is that self-doubt is telling you that you don't have enough skill to do it well, then self-doubt might be right. It might actually just be self-awareness and the understanding that you don't have that skill yet. And that's an incredibly valuable, useful observation, if you don't let it stop you from starting that project anyway, with the understanding that doing so is the only way to develop it. Self-doubt, for many, is just self-awareness taken too far. It's seeing your own weaknesses, which is a good thing, and then using them as evidence that you'll never overcome them or you have no strengths, which isn't. Seeing your weaknesses is the only way to overcome them, which is why self-awareness is so important. But you only can if your awareness of them motivates you to, rather than convinces you not to bother trying. And it's up to you to decide whether you want to let seeing your faults push you to grow past them, or give up and let them define you. And that's a decision you'll have to make every day for the rest of your life. And that's unbelievably difficult, and I'm not saying it isn't, but it's worth it. It helps to try to be more introspective and aware of the nature of your thoughts, so that you're more cognizant of where each one falls on the spectrum between self-awareness and self-doubt. Like, are you thinking, I suck at drawing hands, or I really need to study how to draw hands more? Because they're really both the same observation, it's just that one is useful to you and one is going to make you never want to draw a hand again. And the way you feel about art is dependent on which one you listen to. Calling yourself out on negative self-talk makes you more aware of it, and therefore more equipped to handle the problem that's causing it productively, something that's especially important if you've been dealing with self-doubt for a really long time. Negative self-talk progresses with time and gradually comes to feel normal, and for many there comes a point where we accept thoughts like, I'm worthless, I should give up, my art is shit and everyone hates it, without question. And even if we can't stop ourselves from having those thoughts, we can change how we respond to them. We can reject them and stop seeing them as normal. It just takes time and a lot of hard work. It may not stop them from coming, but it'll turn them from a loudspeaker announcement that's impossible to ignore into the distant conversation of those obnoxious tech bros at the other side of the cafe that won't shut up about crypto, but are far enough away and quiet enough that you can easily tune them out by listening to Starbomb's newest album on repeat for the 57th consecutive time. And regardless of the fact that the needless, ridiculous specificity of that example was my way of casually venting about what's going on in this coffee shop as I'm scripting this, I'm sure you get my point. Ultimately, like I said in the beginning of this video, I waited a really long time to talk about self-doubt, because I thought I'd only have something of value to say if I'd overcome it. And then I realized that that's exactly what self-doubt makes me do with art. I stopped myself from showing anyone my art because I was waiting until I was good enough that I thought they'd like it. I stopped myself from selling my art because I was waiting until it was good enough that I thought someone would buy it. I stopped myself from making my comic because I was waiting until I thought my art was good enough to tell my stories. And I would have been waiting forever, because self-doubt is a lifelong struggle that doesn't go away. I don't think I'd ever have had the confidence to believe that I was a good enough artist to do anything. And I'm so glad that I stopped waiting until I did to do those things anyway. Doing them and failing was so much more valuable to me than I ever thought it would be. because now I can do them a little better. And I will happily let my art suck in my eyes and that of anyone who hates it forever, because I like making it, and every time I make it, it gets a little better, and that's a victory. Honestly, I think putting so much of my art out there in so many ways is exactly what helped me get to that point, because the thing I feared most happened. I was terrified of failure, terrified that other people would hate my art, terrified that I would hate my art, and that all happened. I failed. I challenged myself with techniques that I didn't execute well. Most of my finished pieces fell short of the ideas I had for them, and people did hate it. I've gotten more comments than I can count on videos and other corners of the internet alike, calling my art as terrible as I always feared that they would think it was, saying I'm not a good enough artist to call myself one, much less make art my job or run an art channel. They still regularly shit on me for either being arrogant or stupid enough to make art my job when my current skill level is still so low. And I hated my art too. I can barely look at 90% of my early videos without cringing at how awful the speed paints are, and I still feel embarrassed of almost all of the pieces where I tried something new and failed. And absolutely none of that f***ing mattered at all. I was scared of nothing, because the worst case scenario just wasn't the nightmare that I was sure it would be. I failed. I hated my art. I shared it with people who hated it too. And because I never let that stop me, I've grown. I've improved as an artist, even though I know I still have a very long way to go. And I'm proud of the progress I've made. Other people seeing no value in my art has no bearing on the value that I see in it or its creation. Even my own hatred of the vast majority of what I draw doesn't make me want to give up or stop drawing anymore. It just makes me want to try harder. Because there's nothing to lose now that the only bad things that could come from trying have happened, and they haven't beaten me. I don't run this channel or sell my art because I think I'm a good enough artist to be giving advice, talking about art, or trying to make a living from it. I'm doing it because I think I'm not, and I just don't care. I don't think I'll ever think I'm a good enough artist to do absolutely anything, and I'm okay with that, because if I let that stop me from doing those things anyway, I'll never get anywhere near good enough at them to succeed. And even if no amount of success or improvement is enough to silence my self-doubt, it's an inner voice that I'm done listening to. None of us will ever be good enough to do the things that we want based on our own standards or those of our critics, and that is never a reason not to do them. I've been studying a lot of philosophy lately, and one thing Seneca wrote really hit me. Enough that I decided to talk about this in the first place, actually. What, say you? Are you giving me advice? Indeed, have you already advised yourself? Already corrected your own faults? Is this the reason why you have leisure to reform other men? No, I am not so shameless as to undertake to cure my fellow men when I am ill myself. I am, however, discussing with you troubles which concern us both, and sharing the remedy with you, just as if we were lying ill in the same hospital. It made me realize that self-doubt, for me, is the same as art as it is for this video, and my channel as a whole. I'm not making these videos because I think I'm a great artist that's qualified to teach others. I'm making these videos because I'm not yet, and I'm sharing that journey with people who aren't yet either, because we aren't. And I like to think there's value in that, just like I think there's value in expressing my thoughts on artistic self-doubt even if I haven't beaten it. Because there's something really freeing and healing in sharing your own imperfections and fears, in letting yourself be flawed and showing those flaws to the world freely and without shame, rather than hiding them away or waiting until they're gone. They might never be gone. You might always be flawed. And so long as you're always striving to be better anyway, it's more important to know that and be okay with it than it is to seek perfection that no one can achieve. Trying is just as valuable as succeeding if you never stop. I'll probably never be able to look at my work and think, I'm a good artist now. I've proven self-doubt wrong, like I can when I run the 10 miles that athletic self-doubt once convinced me I couldn't. I'll never be able to silence that voice with objectivity. And yeah, that hurts, and it's hard. But as Seneca also said, when we can never prove whether we really know a thing, we must always be learning it. And from that perspective, maybe that's not such a bad thing. We just have to see self-doubt as a reason to keep trying rather than a reason to give up. So stop letting it make you wait until you're a good enough artist to do absolutely anything. You might not think your art is good enough for anything. That doesn't mean it isn't. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members Joseph Solomon, TC Pratt, Zelda Deverak42, Haruki Saluzzo, King Good James, CP Lil Thing, Art of Amethyst Fable, Extinction Animation, and Andy the Hedgehog, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, Cora Fear, Jamisha Walker, Alengshi, Kim Yin, Crazy Yasar, Gentong, Grayson Xavier, Blah Mage, TC Pratt, Finn, Celine Merriman, Ash, Eldritchia, The Stray Dog, Ulura, Greg Noble, Decagon, Jenny Chan, Catbus, Mac, Lucy Yamajiki, Selena Bibi, Pryday, Totally Shogun, Insomniac Sleep Schedule, Wing Tang Wong, Marie Greer, Potato, and Jazz. And I'll see you in the next one.